look like. This is a story that I constantly tell because it constantly takes us to somewhere helpful. It's a story that was given to me by a nurse called Margaret Hutchison from Adelaide. And she talks about the way in which a young woman, well, when I say young, mid-50s, very young, who had advanced dementia, or was advancing in her dementia. Normally, she was a very placid, pleasant person. Normally, she was, not very anxious, pretty peaceful. But suddenly, for whatever reason, she became anxious, she became disturbed, and she started to walk up and down the ward, repeating a single word over and over and over again. Now, initially, the staff treated this as some kind of symptom of something that was either biologically or psychologically going wrong. And so they decided, well, should we medicate? Should we restrain her? Should we transfer her to a different ward? What should we do? And eventually one nurse got alongside her and just started to walk with her. And so they walked together up and down the ward. And eventually the nurse began to see what the problem was. Because the word that the woman was repeating was God, right? So she was going, God, 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 because she was a religious person, and then God, God, God. And the nurse kind of clicked in and said to her, are you afraid that you're going to forget God? And the woman stopped and said, that's exactly it. I'm afraid I'm going to forget God. Most of her life she'd been involved with religious communities. And the nurse said to her, well, it may be that in some sense you forget God, but God will never forget you. And in that instant, the behavior stopped, and she carried on her journey into dementia in a state of peacefulness. Now, my point there is not a religious point, although the religious point is important, that we're kind of held by God in that way. My point is also that she could be forgotten, not simply by God. Her fear was not being forgotten simply by God, but also simply be forgotten by us. The idea of remembering one another, the idea of remembering one another well, is fundamentally important for what you might call meaningful, existential, spiritual care. But when you think about the way that people with dementia are remembered by society negatively, the question for us as those who care is, how can we remember one another well? When our stories are coming apart, who'll tell our story properly? Who'll tell our story well? I have a friend who, she doesn't have dementia, but she's started to put together a memory box. And in that memory box, she puts things that remind her of the things she liked, music and various other things. Now, the reason she's doing that is simply because she doesn't trust her children to pick the right kinds of music, right kinds of things when she's forgotten herself, or forgotten certain things about herself. And I think that's really important. If you want people to tell your story well, then this is the time to begin to tell that story effectively.